everybody, and welcome to another great episode of My EdTech Life. Thank you so much for joining me on this wonderful Wednesday. I know it's a Wednesday. I mean, it's been the holidays. We took a little bit of time off, but today we've got an amazing show, and I'm so excited for today's show because we're going to be talking about AI and instructional design with our amazing guest, Dr. Luke Hobson, who is joining us, who is a second-time guest. But before we get into our conversation, guys, I just want to say thank you for all of your support, all the likes, the shares, the follows. Thank you so much to all our new YouTube subscribers. As you know, our mission is to get to 1,000 subscribers, and you're definitely helping us get closer to that. So thank you so much for that. Thank you so much for really just taking our content in and really just all the comments and reposts. I mean, it goes a long way. Thank you for all of your support as always. And tonight, again, like I mentioned, we definitely have a stellar guest, two-time guest, and I'm really excited because every time Dr. Luke and I get together and we have some amazing conversations about just creativity and just content creation amongst other things. And tonight we're going to be talking about something that he is definitely very well known for, which is instructional design and, of course, AI's role in instructional design. And we're just going to kind of recap and learn a little bit about what he's experienced this whole year. You know, it's been a little bit over a year since ChatGPT came out, and we're definitely going to learn a little bit more of that. So, Dr. Luke Hobson, how are you this evening?
Fonz, I'm well. I'm well. Thank you again for having me. 2 times. Pretty
Two
cool.
times.
Yeah,
That's right. It is
yeah,
cool. So I love it.
absolutely.
But thank you so much for definitely gracing us with your presence. As you know, it's always a blast, chatting with you. And, since the first time we've connected, and you're definitely always putting out some amazing content, which we will be sharing here throughout the chat. But Dr. Hobson, for all our audience members who may not be familiar with your work yet or haven't quite connected with you, can you please give us a little brief introduction and what your context is within the instructional design space?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I identify as a learning nerd. Basically, anything about instructional design and designing learning experiences, that is what I am all about. For my full time gig, I am the senior instructional designer and program manager at MIT X Pro. I also teach at the University of Miami in the doctoral program for applied learning sciences. And I post a lot of content on the internet, the blog, a podcast, a YouTube channel. Now 2 books, because I release one the other day for an ebook. So now I have to start to save them. Now I have 2 books as well. And produce a lot of other different types of things to be able to help teach people about instructional design. And as you mentioned, I have been heavily dabbling within the AI space as well ever since that came into our world. And fun fact, I was thinking about this a little bit more. I was first introduced to ChatGPT back working on a program in 2020, which is wild. The professor who I was working with mentioned about it inside of his program. And at the time, I was like, all right, kind of cool. Like, but that doesn't really intersect inside of instructional design. And then now, fast forward 4 years, and I'm like, well, this is all I'm talking about now. So I was wrong. And things have moved inside of this direction.
Wow. And that is amazing. And so I'm really excited to dive in deep because I know, like you said, you are definitely just a lifelong learner, like you said, learning nerd and everything. And I know you and we really nerd out a lot just on a lot of the great tools that are out there, especially about content creation. But, I want to talk a little bit more about, your role in higher ed. As we know, you mentioned instructional design. And so I want to know a little bit here, starting off with reflecting over this whole year, like you mentioned, being introduced to ChatGPT, being introduced to AI as a whole. So, can you share some insights on the most significant ways that AI has influenced your work in this past year?
I mean, in the past, it's so crazy because if you asked me this question like 2 months ago, my answer would be different. And this is like the most insane thing about all of this is that constantly we are being introduced to something new and something keeps on coming about. And we have to essentially sift through the weeds to be able to say, like, is this actually relevant for what I'm doing? Or maybe it's kind of like meh. So it really has so much to do with research and trying to be able to see what other types of people who I'll just call like thought leaders in the AI space. Like, I want to know, like, what are they doing? And I'm trying to be able to research and see much more from them. But one thing that came about the other day that I saw Ethan Mollick do over at Wharton, shout out to him, and he mentioned about how he created his own customized GPT. And as soon as I heard about that, like the wheels inside of my head started to turn and say like, wait a second, are you telling me that with the latest for GPT-4, I can make my own customized version and I can actually feed it the data that I want? Because there's a whole bunch of things that Chat GPT and any of the LLMs have always done where they've said things where you're like, I don't agree with that. Like, no, that's not true. Where all of a sudden I can feed it my own data sets. I can make corrections, different forms of guidance and whatnot. And then that way, all of a sudden, now I have my very own custom GPT. And I did that. I created something called Your UDL Pal as far as for helping out with professors, instructional designers, teachers, other educators, if they want to be able to actually see, are their learning experiences essentially being able to be used by everybody, which is the essence about for UDL, to make meaningful learning for all learners. And all of a sudden now I had this fully functioning thing that I could use and share with other people. And it's public. Anyone can use it right now. And I only spent maybe 25 minutes on it, and all of a sudden it was done. And it was giving incredible information about how to make their learning experiences more accessible, more UDL friendly, and just to think about other different ways for meeting and thinking about learning preferences that maybe an educator wouldn't actually think about. But all of a sudden you have a little, a type of a little buddy to be able to help you out for kickstarting new ideas. And now it can do that. So that has been the most influential thing that I've seen lately, as far as for having that type of a Kickstarter, a type of someone to be able to essentially work alongside you for designing your learning experiences that never really had that before, unless you were working with another teammate or someone else. So that's been the biggest thing lately.
Man, and that is great. And I know that when that came out, the first thing I did, obviously working in just K-12 for us, I was just using some of that for just streamline our UIL process, for our UIL leagues and creating tests and contests material and everything, and just feeding it the information and coming up with that was just amazing. And also, obviously, being a podcaster, creating my own little podcast GPT where all I do is I just put in, just some brief information about my most recent guest, and then it just spits out everything that I need. And it's just amazing what it can do. And like you mentioned, for yourself, having that kind of like co-pilot or that, virtual partner, or actually just your GPT buddy to help you and guide you, feeding it all that information and just bringing out, giving you some amazing outputs that you can tweak, that you can edit as needed. And it's something that is amazing. So I want to ask you though, I know that right now is something that is really big for you, but in the very beginning, what were your initial thoughts coming into, starting to use AI, and you being like, well, as my role as an instructional designer, was there a little bit of fear, or a little bit of concern when this came out? So tell me a little bit about that from the beginning.
So personally, I did not have any fear about this, because the fact trying to get anyone to use a piece of technology in academia who's not an instructional designer is like pulling teeth. And I'm like, there's no way that people are now going to rely and try to do things themselves to be able to ask about with drafting different forms of assignments or for scenarios or creating case studies or whatever. It's like, I'm not really too concerned about this. And to be very completely transparent too, when I was first introduced to AI from shout out to my friend Peter Shea, who kept on pinging me saying, you got to try GPT, you got to try this thing. It really could be the next thing. And as you and I both are living inside of this world of education, whenever somebody says that here is the new thing that is going to revolutionize education, I'm like, yeah, okay. Like every year we're introduced to something new, but it's going to be, it was like flipped classroom model, competency-based education, micro learning, VR, whatever it is. And all of them great, have their own place and time, don't get me wrong. But to say this will be the brand new thing to just completely change instructional design completely, I'm like, I don't really know. But as I started to experiment with things, I was like, well, actually, I see some potential. Yeah, I can help with drafting up learning objectives. It's not really doing a great job, but at least it's starting to be able to get there, and to think about different forms of assignments, to be able to repurpose transcripts was the first thing that I really did. I would just upload a transcript in one of my videos to be able to say like, what can we do with this? And essentially, it became a part of a reading and then being able to create it into a different form of a scenario and all these other different things. So I was like, man, that's actually really cool. Like I never really thought that this could really do this in this capacity. And the more and more that I kept on experimenting with things, eventually it brought me down this rabbit hole where I was being able to draft up letters of recommendations for students. It was just like I fed it like an entire chapter of my book to be able to say, learn how I write. Now I want you to do X. And all of a sudden, it started to be able to do this. But every single time, Fonz, I was seeing limitations, though, along the way. So it was never perfect. And one of the things that it started to do, because if you follow any of the things that I talk about, I use stories. I'm a storyteller. I try to be able to give so many examples of the real world, talk about my past blunders and things of that nature. And what it would do, it would make up stories about me and try to put that into the writing. And I'm like, no, I didn't do that when I was 5 years old. Like, no, that's not real. So there was a lot of, okay, we're getting there, but we still need to be able to correct these things in order to make it usable and believable for what we want to be able to do.
Yeah, no, and that's something that you hit on right off the bat. One of the things that I always tell my colleagues or just tell anybody that I'm working with too as well is yes, the technology is there. It comes out. We get so excited. I was very much like you, where I'm like, it's there, and the claims and everything, but I always kind of remained just kind of in the middle, just because at that time when that was coming out, I was started doing my research for one of my doctoral classes, and I was like, hey, I started going deep dive into the privacy aspect. Obviously that dark side that nobody really talks about a lot. It's just kind of in passing. It's like, oh yeah, just be careful with what information you put in there. Okay, but what if you do? Like, where is that information going? What is getting done with that? What's happening, and so on? Really, I think with educators, it becomes more of like, hey, I want to try the next thing, the next tool. I'm just going to go ahead and click. Yes, terms of service, whatever, check the mark, the little check mark, and then just go to town, not really knowing what you're kind of getting yourself into, or, some of those implications. And so I kind of slowed down a bit and just being very cautious, still experimenting with it on my own, just learning. Obviously, Ethan Malik, too, is just a person that I follow, learned a lot from him and a lot of other people that were using it, but just always very cautious. And it isn't until now, starting in January, that I'm like really going full force, because there are some AI apps in the education space that do have the COPPA compliance, FERPA, and all that good stuff for the privacy aspect and so on. So just making sure that I do my due diligence, because we always want to protect our data, protect our students. But we also noticed, and I don't know if you did, but when Dev Day came out, and of course talking about how creating your own GPTs, I think we saw a lot of apps kind of just go under, because they were just kind of like those fancy GPT wrappers. So what were your thoughts on that? Were you already experimenting with some apps that might have already been like, oh, maybe they went under because of this? So tell me your experience with that.
I was assuming that that was going to happen, especially to even going broader beyond apps, because of course I tried everything from GPT to Google Bard to Dolly to Claude to, like, I tried all of them, right? And as soon as ChatGPT came out with a mobile version, I was like, oh, they're all done. Like, you're telling me I can now use this on my phone? Like, everything's done. Like, we're moving in this direction. And of course, same thing too when GPT combined with Dolly, or should I say when OpenAI combined with Dolly to be able to do that, and trying to be able to create artwork for different types of scenario based problems, and it was able to do so. So, like, hypothetically speaking, let's say when I'm working on a leadership course, and inside of this leadership course we're talking about a company that has a problem with culture and it implodes, and there's this whole story, this whole shebang. And then at the same time, now that we have this, I want to make it more believable. Create for me a logo of this company, but actually give me 3 designs, make it modern, make it edgy, and make it look, classy, whatever. And all of a sudden it can do that. Put it in colors of blue and white. Try to be able to do this and this and this. And that was just like, all right, this is such a far advanced different direction than for all of these other little one-off different types of apps. Well, still, some are still great, but at the same time, it's like all of a sudden everything is getting pushed out of a sandbox, and now we have this one major one to be able to do. And I'm sure that this is only going to keep on happening more. And with our world specifically, what I am extremely interested in because there are pros and cons of this, to be very clear and transparent, is how learning management systems are incorporating AI. Because that to me is fascinating. Because I was talking with a friend of mine, Devlin Peck, who probably anyone who's listening to instructional design knows who he is. He's one of the biggest names inside of his space for sharing content and information. And he mentioned when I interviewed him before about how he's just like, I could see e-learning actually really taking the brunt force of this and getting eliminated. And I was like, yeah, there's a lot of things that we do, but it's just so simple and easy to do. But anyone can really essentially do it because there's so many different types of software and authoring tools that are just extremely easy to be able to use that, yeah, hypothetically speaking, if you have, let's say, AI and embedded inside of an LMS, well, then does that essentially eliminate the need for authoring tools? And I've seen some where it's like, yeah, that's what they did. They've
Yeah.
essentially gotten rid of the idea for authoring tools because now you can do everything inside of a learning management system, and that's fascinating. Brightspace is one from D2L that I've seen, and I'm like, this is insane to think about where we're at now compared to just a couple of years ago. But of course, the big thing with that then too, as you were talking about with data privacy, I think about things as well as far as for with who is exactly using this. Because right now, using an app is one thing. But now all of a sudden that we have every professor who is, let's say, trying to be able to use an LMS, and they're like, oh, I can just make multiple choice questions like this. Let's see what happens. And you're like, oh, wait, hold on. Hold on a second. Like, no, like, that's not correct. We need to be able to do this. So we definitely need to be able to have the right training in place, make sure the right people are going to be using this and things of that nature. But the potential is there. And it could be really wild. So that's where I'm super curious about with things.
Yeah, I'm really excited too because in a very similar way, I've created like some learning modules before in the past, and of course you go through them, making your own videos and all that stuff. But some of these platforms, like there was one that I saw, it was just called Mini Course Generator, and you just go ahead and put in your information, if you have any documents and all that stuff, very similar to GPT-4, and you just pop it in, and it'll lay out the whole class for you, and it'll do little quizzes. It'll even put in pictures. It'll put in just everything there for you. And then you just go in and tweak. And I'm like, this is amazing. So even as a content creator, it's like now I can say, hey, here's like your, podcasting 101, something basic, something just very easy. And one of the things that I love about AI is just really about keeping it simple and streamlined. I know that there are many apps out there. We can go on for days about apps and what they can do, but I'm always like, okay, what is our overall objective? What are we trying to do? What do we want our learner to get out of this? And is this either going to be something positive or negative for them to use as far as the experience? And the more easy and streamlined it is, the better. And, oftentimes in the education space here, I know in K-12, I don't know about, in the instructional design space, maybe there is some similarity, but on Twitter or anywhere that there's educators, somebody's going to come up and say, hey, I just use this for this. And everybody jumps on that. And then they start using it. And then the next week, somebody else is using something else. And then they jump on that, which is kind of like a habit that I see a lot of app jumping or app hopping. And that causes a lot of frustration, not only for a lot of the teachers, but a lot of the students too as well, because now they're using multiple apps and there are different sign-ons or different things when there's always a lot of duplication of efforts. Is the instructional design space very similar to that as far as app hopping and or within, your community?
It's a good question. I would say I don't think it is as, and of course I'm speaking so broadly as a part of an entire industry, but I don't think so as much because I know from an instructional design perspective, we are acutely aware about the fact that if you're designing a learning experience and you're asking someone to be able to sign in to like 30 things, it's miserable and nothing ever works. Nothing is ever connected correctly the way that it should be. They're advertised that, of course, they all work with one another, but they don't. It's things of that nature. So I know that for many of us, we are just so focused to make sure that if you're going to be going inside of a type of an online class, let's say, that we're definitely using the right ones and not constantly changing things every single time. And of course, this is a huge problem with AI is that so much changes so fast. You teach one semester, by the time it's done, all of a sudden you have a new set of tools. And it's just like, so it's really tricky to be able to do. But you mentioned exactly what I was going to say as well, is that what is the goal? And of course, thinking about the students, what is exactly in this for them? Why are they taking this type of learning experience? How is this going to benefit them? How is this going to help them? Because for so much, yes, we can get completely fascinated by the different types of tools and tech and all that fun stuff. But at the end of the day, is this actually helping out the learners, the students? Like, is it or not? Because if it's not, and this is just making things super clunky and confusing, and then, of course, from a design perspective, you're now having to change all of that on the back end with every single class and every single run. And that's just really not fun for anything involved. And of course, the goal for what we're trying to be able to do with improving learning experiences and designing learning experiences with AI is not just to make crappy stuff faster, which is what some people have done. Where I'm like, no, it's not the point. Like, the point is not just like produce like quantity like at a rapid rate. It's no, we should still be thinking about quality first and foremost. And yes, streamline these processes with different forms of apps and tools and everything else. But like, we really, really need to make sure that we're doing things at the end of the day for the right purposes and the right reasons.
Oh, I love that. I love that you said that because one of the things that I often see, like I mentioned, is in the education space, it's a lot of app hopping and sometimes that duplication of efforts where one app is perfectly fine to get you to get to that learning objective to make sure that the student has, mastered that concept or they can show their learning, whether through an artifact that they create and so on and so forth. But like I mentioned, sometimes that's that influence of and that I call it it's really the FOMO, the fear of missing out because this person's doing it. Like I want to do it too because I want to post it. And sometimes it's because they want to post it and they get excited, which is great. But at the end of the day, I think sometimes, like you mentioned, it's like now you've got one app for every little thing where you could have really dove deep into that app and really get what you need and then some. But oftentimes we don't spend enough time in those apps to really see what they're able to do and capable of doing. And especially now with so many new things coming out, everybody wants to kind of do that. And so sometimes it's just that fear of, again, number one, teachers using a lot of apps. Number two, now you've got teachers that may not be as proficient in tech that have that fear of missing out because, oh, that teacher's doing this and I can't, but I'm trying to, and I mess up, and then it causes more frustration. And so that's why with myself, I that's why I did a presentation. What was it, 3 weeks ago or something called Kiss Your AI? Just keep it simple and streamlined. 2 to 3 tools that you're great at, and really dive in deep and really, take them and use them and maximize them. Again, at the end of the day, it's all about your student and your student output. I know we worry a lot about, our output that we get from GPT, which is obviously we need to make sure that that is in line too. But really, it's what's the student output and are we getting what we need to make sure that we're showing mastery and that there is learning that's taking place. So I want to ask you now, we're kind of just switching a little bit here, is the reaction. I know that for you, I know you got very excited and so on, but within the instructional design space and the people that you are, frequently, working with or in contact with, what was the predominant reaction amongst your colleagues with AI coming out?
Think it was a mixed bag. It was a mixed bag. You definitely had the people who were the early adopters of technology. So for those who were just all about it and they were just sharing and sharing and sharing all the different types of things. And then you definitely have people who were on the exact opposite side of the house. They had a healthy amount of skepticism to be like, like, hold on a second. Like, let's really think about this. And what about plagiarism? And it's pulling from fake citations. And like, you have like all those different types of academics as well inside of this space. But I know that one thing which I saw, which was very clear, and I'm sure you saw it online as well too, is that so many people were just sharing about AI, which was kind of like good and bad, because in one sense, you had all these people who were making up this big to do about things and they were sharing about their best tips and their best tricks. And certainly it was going to be helpful. But I can constantly tell you that it was essentially looking at a LinkedIn carousel every 3 seconds about how to use prompts for Chat GPT. And it's like every single thing. I'm like, all right, we're clearly just copying and pasting each other's work here. Like, we need something new to come out to really make us say like, oh, yeah, that's different. Like what about like that kind of direction? But a lot of folks were, and I'm happy to be able to say that there was this type of a inquisitive nature about just how do we actually use this? People are talking about this. Now I need to be able to know how to use this because my other colleagues are mentioning about how they're using Google Bard and Chat GPT, and maybe I should know a thing or two about a thing or two. So there was a lot of just sharing information, which was fantastic. It's like the way that academics should be, where the information is just available, where it's just like, here you go. Here's all the different things. If you want to dive in deeper, you can, but here's at least the basics about prompt engineering. Here's what's working out well. Here's what's not working out well. And clearly it's not doing great. Like, for instance, having different types of conversations around learning styles that is still, for whatever reason, embedded and engraved inside of our society, and it just like won't go away. And Chat GPT is now reinforcing that, which is super duper. But anyway, just kind of like tangent for another day. But there's this a lot of sharing from that type of information. And yeah, just a couple of different types of things from a pros and cons perspective around that. But now it seems like the dust is settled and that we're in this kind of a new space where we're all aware about AI. We know what it can do. And it kind of feels like we're waiting for the next thing of what's going to be the next, like, ooh, this is pushing things in a whole different type of direction. And it seems like we're waiting. I'm not sure if you're waiting inside of your space, but like that's kind of a sense that I'm getting right now.
Yeah, no, and that's the way it's been for me, just kind of that wait and see, but cautiously experimenting and seeing what is out there and really trying to do my best. Obviously, working in a school district and wanting to share this with teachers, it's definitely no easy feat because you want to make sure that you're giving them the best things that are not going to cause any frustration. And so, obviously, seeing a lot of things going on in the education space, and very much like you, I agree that at the very beginning, it's like every carousel was out there, whether it's on LinkedIn, on Twitter, Instagram, and so on, and just seeing information out there. And then that kind of died down a bit. And then it really kind of weeded out some of the, those players that were just kind of putting stuff out and trying to sell their course and trying to sell all of this, where they're finding the real people that are sharing the great knowledge in innovative ways. And that's why on LinkedIn, definitely Ethan Malik that I follow with doing some great stuff that he's sharing. And of course, in the higher ed space as well, but that can easily translate into K-12 space, which is something that's definitely very important. And, again, it's hard because as much as I love the tech, it's constantly changing. And then again, if I introduce something, it's like, oh, okay, well, that's not there anymore because let's say OpenAI did another dev day and now they're able to do this. So that company now has gone under. And I think the fear for me is that if you are investing in something that is supposed to be education based, but maybe they're using some of that large language model or they're using OpenAI per se, and then let's say that now there's either a bigger premium on that or they create something where it's going to substitute that. Well, as a school district, let's say you just paid, $10,000, $16,000 for licenses for the year. And then all of a sudden to know that, hey, well, we're no longer around because, dev day 2 or dev day 3 and so on. So that's the scary part for me in that aspect. So for me, for myself, what I'm doing is just really, hey, let's just talk about GPT and at the most basic and just kind of start from there and use that just to make sure that our teachers are feeling very comfortable with that. So again, some things there that we all have to adapt. And I'm surprised though, we recently did an AI summit, and out of all the attendees there, I would say that maybe there was a good 20, 25 maybe out of 125, maybe 130 attendees that were, felt comfortable and felt proficient. And there were still some attendees there that had never even logged in to
Mhm.
Chat GPT. And so I want to ask you, as far as your experience in higher ed, I was listening to another podcast and actually with Jason Gulia, who actually will be on the show tomorrow morning. He said that, there was that fear that, obviously the introduction, there was kind of like that excitement, but then that summer semester came through and there was a lull. And he said that right now it doesn't seem that higher ed is really adopting at the rate that it should, that it kind of slowed down a bit. What has been your experience? Have you seen some of that around in through, I mean, with
Ye-
the campuses that you work for?
Yeah, 100%, 100%. So the biggest thing, and Jason's wonderful. I'm really glad he's going to be on the show to explain more about his thoughts. He's another person like Ethan, who I certainly like to be able to follow and see what he's been up to. But the thing about higher education, just as a whole, higher ed does not move quickly. Period. No matter the institution, no matter how great they are, no matter anything else of the sort. And yes, of course, there are going to be those special types of circumstances where there are those places that they wholeheartedly adopt about something new and they're working like magic and everything else. But if I'm painting in broad brushstrokes, once again, talking about an entire type of space or a field or an industry, higher education does not move quickly. Higher education has so many problems right now, too, where AI is just like another problem to throw on top of the list of problems where it's like you already can't figure out about all these other different things. And then now all of a sudden AI has just been thrown into this mix. And that's a humongous type of a hurdle and a barrier and a challenge to be able to get around. So when thinking about it from that perspective and from following Jason's work, doesn't surprise me in any way, shape, or form that when he is doing speaking engagements or consulting or anything else, we're talking about with just what AI can actually do and what it is versus what it is not, which is another thing. Because of course now, like I'm also now guilty of this, of saying when I'm referring to AI, I'm not specifically only talking about Chat GPT, but that's what people now say is as this like GPT, therefore it's AI, and it kind of like interchangeable. But anyway, there's so much more that can I really do. And for a lot of folks out there, they just simply don't know. They're aware about it now. And now that's why they're kind of like, okay, yeah, that was the big thing. But it was only the big thing in higher education because of the fact that it was pulling fake citations. If it didn't do that, I promise you that no one would be talking about this inside of higher education unless that there was some other monumental wave that came about where all of a sudden people were like, whoa, this is a problem. Plagiarism was another one. How do we detect this? Turnitin can't detect this yet. And then now there's this chat GPT 0 and it's not working properly and everything else. And there were some people who I know who actually went through with their institution and essentially accused students of saying that you clearly use chat GPT, you're plagiarizing everything else of the sort. And hey, lo and behold, it was a false positive. And now you have this huge, awful turmoil inside of your institution. What are you going to do? So it's almost like from a higher education perspective, unless there was a problem, then they're like, nah, it's fine. Like, but that's what's going to drive that type of a change. But if you're coming into this by saying, hey, look at this, it's innovative. We can do something new. We can streamline this. We can make this better for students. And then that's when you get that typical type of uphill battle to be able to sell this to the masses about why this is actually a good thing. And look at what this can really do to help improve the learning experiences, which is a whole different sell as opposed to fear around plagiarism detection and things of that nature.
Yeah. No, and I agree with you. At least for ourselves, I know that we had Turnitin, maybe for a couple of years, and we didn't renew this year at all whatsoever. Actually, our ELA teachers kind of took it upon themselves and they said, "Look, we're not worried about this. Like, we want to learn how to use this to help us make our teachers, excuse me, our students better writers." And I'm talking about, just Chat GPT, because we only have that open for our educators. We don't have it open for our students at all whatsoever. So I've been kind of working on that with teachers as far as helping them, at least with rubrics or just kind of things to help them give some feedback and enhance the learning experience through those writing assignments and kind of changing up a bit. But they're like, hey, look, we're not worried about it. Like, well, what they did is they just say, you know what, we just have the students do their writing in our class, and really, it's going to be a combination of writing and then a learning artifact that they would create with that, so just to really get that authentic learning. So our educators, thankfully have really adapted very well to this situation, and they didn't really kind of panic. I'm sure that there was a little bit, but they were able to adapt to the situation, and so that's been great. So I want to ask you, with having said that, and I know we mentioned Turnitin, what is your institution's stance on incorporating AI, within the learning or within your instructional design role?
Sure. So let me definitely first and foremost say that I do not speak for all of MIT. Throw that out there right away as far as for that. Because MIT did just actually come together and create this massive resource to be able to help educate the masses around AI with everything, which I'm sure you can find if you just Google that right now. But specifically for my division, when we got together and we put our heads together to be able to think about this, we did not want to be able to discourage encourage the creative use as far as for with AI, as far as for if that's going to be able to help you with things, then fantastic. But obviously, don't go overboard with it. And then now we're getting into that realm of like, is it really your work or not? So it's just like, don't essentially go down the deep end as far as for this goes. But by all means, if you want to be able to use it as a Kickstarter, which is what we've been talking about as well, this kind of entire conversation is that AI very much so can help you when you are feeling stuck or going in a different direction or giving you a whole idea that you never really thought about before, then yeah, it's going to be what you're going to use. Because also, let's be real, if I say don't use AI, people will still use AI. Like it's kind of like that. Like let's meet students where they are here, because if you have access to your smartphone, if you have access into anything else, then are you going to be using this? Probably. And I know that like I do right now for my job. Like, so why would I tell you not to be able to use it when I know you're just going to use it at the end of the day as well? So it's also being smart with this and just trying to be able to think about this from this perspective. In my division as well too, we do focus on professional development for folks. So it's not as much, I would say, as a concern from my side of the house, because people who are taking our types of programs, they want to be there. This is something they want to be able to upskill in. They want to be able to grow inside of a skill set. So therefore, they are definitely giving it their all to be able to do. Not like there's people who are usually going to be taking something like the more of a traditional sense as far as with a 16 semester or things of that nature. It's much more, you want to be able to do this. You want to be able to grow. This is going to help you to get you inside of that right direction, hence professional development. But that's a couple of different angles around that. Personally, inside of the courses that I teach, I want to be able to use AI with my students in real time to be allow them to be able to actually see about what it can and what it can't do. So one of the assignments inside of my class at the University of Miami is that we go through and we create a type of a fictitious type of a syllabus where it's a scenario-based problem, and they go through, they're creating a brand new type of essentially like an MBA program, let's say. It creates everything for the MBA, but then we start to dive on into the syllabi affiliated with this, and we start to tear it apart and be able to see about what it did well, but also, really, that doesn't make sense. And why would you link this assignment with this? Why would you do this grading policy? Why would you do this form of a attendance policy and things of that nature? And that's when the students were able to really see about like, oh, AI is not perfect. There's clearly some flaws here, but they can also see too about how it can be incorporated to be able to use, especially if you want to become an instructional designer in the future. I would say that if you don't currently use Chat GPT and you go into a job, I think people would be like baffled. Like, what do you mean you haven't dabbled in anything before? Because like it's just, we've all now tried it at this point in time. So that's kind of a multi-perspective stance to answer your question about a number of different types of ways and institutions.
That's wonderful. And at least with my institution, I know, for example, my department right now, I'm going through kind of the dissertation phase and everything. And my prof is like, yeah, like, we need it. You can use it just to help your ideas, not completely do your writing, but just kind of put your ideas together. And it was something that was great because last May, I actually used it in one of my classes I put in my professor's rubric as I was doing my final paper. And it was just giving me some feedback, things to look at, things to fix, and so on and so forth. And I did very well on that paper. And I shared it with my professor, the head of the department. I said, "Hey, let me show you something that I did." And they were just blown away by it. That one of my professors, Dr. Jewett, said, "Hey, Fonz, can you come into one of my classes? Can you show us how you did this so you can help our students really just say, hey, maybe they have a question, or maybe I may not be available to answer them right away, but something that they can kind of use and put this rubric in and get some feedback." And it just kind of took off from there. So at least I know within my program, they're really just open to using artificial intelligence in that sense. Like you said, sometimes it's either that little Kickstarter or just really to get those ideas across. And of course, for me, what I love, and there's a website that I use, is really just getting my citations correct, because oh my gosh, it's just learning APA 7th edition, then it's probably going to change soon, and that changes. So for me, as long as I get my citations right, I'm good, whether it's in paragraph citations or just my final references. That's really what scares me the most, because now hopefully, like you mentioned, with the writing process, oftentimes it just felt punitive, where you have this body of work that you've done and you work very hard for, and then all of a sudden you get 10 points docked, 20 points docked just for missing a comma or an italicizing something, and it's punitive on the reference. But what about the content and everything that I'm putting here together? And it just seemed like now kind of the tables are turning, and it's like, okay, well, now we writing for stamina, or are we writing for actual content knowledge, and what are we producing? And I've just been, pushing back. I was like, man, we kind of maybe change the way dissertations are done. Like, why can't I just do a podcast for my dissertation? Because I was like,
So that's fascinating. That's really fascinating to be able to think about, because when thinking about, once again, from a universal design for learning lens, there was actually one now doctor, because he graduated with his PhD, that he did his entire dissertation as a rap. Like, he rapped the whole thing as a song, and it's nuts. You can find it on YouTube. It's crazy how amazing it is. And he rhymed like all the right words in there. It makes no sense. I was like, you are a absolute genius to be able to do. But yeah, if you're thinking about demonstrating your knowledge, why couldn't you do that as far as you're being able to turn it into a podcast or for a video or for some type of a different form of presentation? It doesn't need to be the exact same way every single time. But absolutely, I promise you, but if I was going to go back in time and redo my EDD, I'm positive that I'd be able to try to use this, while of course being very, very, very careful from a data privacy perspective, because you will get hammered with that if you do anything incorrect. But as far as you're thinking about things with themes, with coding, because a priori coding is what I actually use for mine. If I can try to be able to identify different types of themes, that what I was doing by hand, and I essentially looked like a crazy person where I just had white papers all over my walls and I'm trying to link together different things, like using like that type of character from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, like with a string, and it looks like I'm maddening and I haven't slept in days, kind of a thing. Like, that's what I did for my writing. And you're telling me that if I had some form of a helpful type of a hint about what direction to go in for a theme or something, that would have saved me days of my life. Like, that's what I did for
absolutely.
days upon days. So I'm so curious to hear how the rest of your program is going to go with that in mind, for sure.
Well, I'm definitely curious about that too. I'm one of those, like, I met with my professor and he's like, okay, this is what we're gonna do on my actual dissertation. And then I said, and then he mentioned, he goes, oh, and then here you can use maybe Chat GPT just to get your ideas in order to do this and this and this, for chapter one and so on. And then I was like, hey, why don't I do my dissertation on writing my dissertation, or using Chat GPT to write my dissertation, kind of deal. Like, it was just one of those inception kind of topics. And he just started laughing. I was like, yeah, it'd be double the work, but it'd be really cool to see, because my first original thought was, why can't I crowdsource my dissertation? My dissertation could be a crowdsourcing of writing my dissertation or something like that. I'm always just trying to think outside the box, because I don't know, maybe it's just that fear of writing that I've never been good at it. I've learned to like it, but that's why I always say, why can't I just do a podcast or a video? That could be my dissertation.
You don't
um,
know, never know. You have
yeah,
no idea where this is going to go. And I mean, thinking about from a literature review perspective, like, oh man, lit reviews take forever. So
yeah,
picking out pull information for you, or to perhaps go and find something that you cannot find yourself as you were scouring through all these different various types of journals. Yeah. So anyway, yes,
yes.
I'm so curious to hear how the rest of that's going to go.
All right. Well, just a couple more questions, two more questions before we wrap up. Right now, within the instructional design space, obviously going back to within your community, and of course the feedback that you get, and the people that you have that you are in contact with. I want to ask you, do right now, are there any barriers that you or many of your colleagues may be running into because of AI within the instructional design space?
You mean as far as you're being able to use AI right now?
Well, as far as, I guess, maybe barriers to for your final products, maybe as far as the creation component of it, or the creation aspect of your designing, your lessons and so on.
So that's a tricky one to answer. There are definitely different types of barriers. The first is going to be cost. As far as thinking about it from that perspective, I'm one of those silly people who pays the $19.99 a month to be able to use GPT-4, and I can confidently tell you that what I'm able to do versus what my colleagues are able to do is different, because I actually pay for it, and they're using the free version. So to give you an example, and I'm not sure if you've done this before, but with GPT-4, you can create your own simulations. that blew my mind. Where it's just like, wait, you're telling me that I don't have to go out and to buy this super expensive simulation from XYZ place that may or may not exactly fit what I'm trying to be able to do, that I can just start from scratch and then create my own, and then I can download it and I can own it and I can repurpose it. And I can only do that with the paid version. And yes, it definitely took me many tries to be able to figure out how to do that. But when I showed it to my colleagues, they're like, how did you do that? Like, I know. Like, this is something that you would never know about because I'm on the paid version. So that's going to 100% be a barrier for everything. And the second is, as far as for, it's almost like being able to say not giving up, which you mentioned this like a little
Yeah.
while ago, is that people tried it for a little bit for being able to do with prompt engineering. And they're like, it's not giving me the answers I want. And I'm just going to kind of go away. And it's like, no, that's not the point. And if you were to observe about how much that I use with GPT, and you saw essentially like the log of just every command I entered from the very start all the way until the end, it would be a massive amount of pages. And there's some different tips and tricks that a lot of folks don't know about because they haven't gone down this type of rabbit hole before. My favorite prompt, my favorite command, by the way, is simply entering in, figure it out. It's like, I can't do this. I'm like, no, you're smart, figure it out.
Yeah.
And it will try again. And you're like, oh, you're right. I guess I can do that. Or you can actually give it an example as far as for with GPT specifically, as far as for giving proof that a certain type of thing can be done. And it will say, no, it can't be done. And then you're like, hey, look at this. Here is literal proof that you can actually do this. And it's like, oh, you're right. Let me try again. And you just keep going like that. And eventually, that's how I wound up with the simulation I wanted to be able to use. Because it was telling me at first, as far as for, no, I can't change up the colors for you. And like, you need to be able to do this with yourself. Let me teach you how to build the simulation. I'm like, no, I do not want to build a simulation. You are building the simulation. And it took forever, but it did it. And I was like, I have now have a way to be able to design a simulation for essentially anything I want to be able to do, as long as I have the right subject matter experts, the right data sets, and all the things of that nature. But I can do that. But of course, once again, from thinking about from a challenge perspective, who else is doing that? As far as for being able to say, oh, I'm not going to quit because, it keeps on giving me no, and I'm going to keep on persisting and seeing if I can eventually get it there. And that's definitely something that a lot of people don't know about. So that's a talking point in and of itself.
Yeah. And I agree with you on that. I think a lot of times it's just that frustration that comes, again, like you mentioned, not getting the correct output right away, but because you're not trying. And obviously, I think it's a lot of it is just that we feel like, oh, this is just something that should be instant and it should be right all the time. So my thing is that I always tell my teachers is one of the things that concerns me the most out of teaching and again putting it into practice within our school district is that you will have some educators that are just like, oh, here's my input, oh, there's my output, I'm going to go with that. So it's like, what habit are we forming? I don't want my teachers to form a bad habit of just taking that first output and say, hey, let's go, let's run with it, and not even bother checking it because they feel that it's going to be 100% accurate, which again, I know that not all of them do that, but it's just really kind of instilling and repeating to them saying, please don't get into that habit because I don't want them to, either there be a mistake, an error, misinformation, things of that sort. And we don't want that. The other thing that you mentioned too is the time investment is definitely something that's there for. Sometimes we can say, oh, yes, ChatGPT can save you hours because you can use it. But then we don't tell them, well, you kind of have to invest a couple of hours to save you those hours in the future. It's that return on investment. So the more you practice, the more you learn this wonderful instrument, like I said, and take down a deep dive and build up those prompt calluses. Before you know it, you're gonna know exactly how to prompt ChatGPT to get all the information. One of the things that I did learn, Dr. Hobson, and I don't know, maybe you were talking about prompts, is oftentimes they tell you like, okay, tell ChatGPT, give it a persona, give it this, give it that. And one of the things that I used to do is say, okay, you are an instructional designer. But I would give it specific instructions to say, you've been an instructional designer for 10 years. And I learned from a podcast to say, why are we limiting ChatGPT? Because keep in mind that it has all the information, like all of it, like scraped up as much information there. So why are we limiting it to 10 years of experience? So now I started changing my prompts to say you're an instructional designer that has all of the information, available to you, in this topic and so on and so forth. And I've been using that and comparing my prompts, and it really has, elevated my prompt and my output. So that's one thing that I learned. So it's very important that we practice and that we learn from others as far as what's out there to, help ease some of that frustration and obviously get into the good habit of putting in that work, but knowing that that return on investment is going to be great. That's for sure.
So my favorite one, and I'll share this with you, is that so like you, I've done the same exact thing. Where at first I was like 10 years experience, whatever, and I'm like, no, there's got to be a better way. So what I started to say is that you are the world's greatest instructional designer. There is no one better than you. How would you do X? Just to see what it would say. But I've done that for other things too, as far as even just thinking about with YouTube videos. What do I want to talk about next? Where I was just like, you are the world's greatest YouTuber. Think about all the, XYZ different types of top performing videos inside of an instructional design space. Which ones should I tackle next? And it would give me a list. And that's pretty darn fascinating. And once again, I look through the list and I'm like, I mean, like maybe 2 out of the 10
Yeah.
or something that I actually want to do. And the rest, I'm like, nah, it's really not my wheelhouse, or I don't really agree, which is like, you can totally disagree with whatever it gives you. But I've done that for you are the world's best marketer. You are the world's greatest instructional designer. I've even done you are a lawyer and trying to be able to help me with thinking about things from that type of a technical space as far as for that goes, which of course it tells you, no, I am not a lawyer. I cannot give you legal advice. I'm like, yeah, but like, let's say hypothetically speaking, you are an incredible lawyer and I want you to draft up this contract. What would you say? And it's like, well, hypothetically, I would say X, Y, and Z, and we'll list out those different forms of bullet points. And I was like, all right, thank you. So, yeah, it's a couple of different, but how would you know that? Unless if you personally have experimented with that, took the time, as you just said, to be able to go and to try to be able to see what it can and can't do, you would never know that. And for most of the types of people who I'm presenting to right now for conferences for higher education, they still instantly say, what about fake citations? Like, that died, right? That's not a thing anymore. Like, oh, I just heard about it. Like, no, luckily we're past that. We have new things to think about, but now we're like going in that direction. So it's something to just be aware of as far as for that goes.
For sure, for sure. I want to give a shout out to William Illingsworth, who's joining us. He says here, what a dream team. Dr. Hobson on My EdTech Life. Love this combo. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. High Tech Podcast. Make sure you check it out. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Luke. I really appreciate you, coming by and just dropping off some truth bombs and your experience and everything that you're doing. It's always fascinating. And more than anything, I definitely appreciate your friendship too, as well. Thank you so much for that too. Being able to, contact each other sometimes with questions and things, whether it be instructional design or content creation. It's always great to just go back and forth with you and making those connections and learning from you as much as hopefully you're learning from me. So I really appreciate you being here. And I know my audience appreciates this and your take on higher ed and AI and exploring all the wonderful world of instructional design. So thank you so much for sharing those experiences. But before we go, I always love to end the show with these 3 questions. And I'm not sure if that already started when you made your first appearance, but if not, here your second appearance, now we get to answer those questions. So my question to you is, here we go. First one, we know that every superhero has an origin story, and we know that Superman's weakness was kryptonite. It was his biggest pain point. So I want to ask you, in the current state of instructional design, what would you say is your current ID kryptonite?
It's moving slowly. I want to go fast. I want to go now. I want to make a difference. I want to make these incredible learning experiences. And if you tell me that I have to wait 6 months until blah, it kills me. I'll do it. I have to. Once again, I work inside of a slow moving type of a higher education space. So I understand, but I just want to go and be able to do things. So that certainly kills me.
Perfect. All right, great answer. And you know what? When I had Will here on the from the High Tech Podcast, who just commented on LinkedIn, one of his things was too that when he was talking is just kind of his experience in higher ed was very slow moving also as well. So I totally get that. All right, question number 2 is if you could have a billboard with anything on it, what would it be and why?
I mean, selfish thing would probably say, go buy my book. I don't know. Something as far as for all the different types of products and things that I do have out there. But what I would say though, if I'm being honest, it would probably be to listen to the podcast. Because like you, I have a podcast. So I love to be able to do. And I'm sure you've heard from your audience as well of connecting with people and hearing about where they listen to you and how and what they do as far as for going on walks with their dog or just washing the dishes or driving in the car with their family and they listen to your show and like you're a part of their world. That's so cool. So being able to spread that even more and reach more learning nerds, I think that'd be my billboard for sure.
Perfect. Excellent. And we will have that podcast listed in the show notes too, as well. So you please make sure that you do listen to it. And if you are interested in instructional design, please make sure that you do purchase the book. The book is great. And I must say that I was honored to receive the, what's it called? The copy, your very
Signed
first.
copy?
Yes, well, a signed copy, but it was let me see, where is
So
it?
what I wish I knew before becoming an instructional designer. That title?
Well, yeah, but it wasn't even the one that was for sale. It was like your own personal copy, like the one they send you, like that
Oh
sample copy.
yes, 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 yes,
So
yes. It's the author copies.
there
Is
we
they
go.
send you like 5 author copies, and yeah,
Yes.
you go to those.
Yeah, so I got one of those. So I'm honored to have that and signed too as well. So I'm sure that I should get a class case for it here and put it right here,
No,
just
no,
like
no.
yours too. That'd be great. All right. And the last question here is if you could turn one of your favorite hobbies or activities into a full-time profession, what would it be and why?
It would be to help people build out their brands. I find that so much fun. And I just do that for fun with people, whether you're an author, you're trying to be able to build that out as far as you're building out an audience or for a email list or trying to think about from marketing campaigns or anything else of the sort. I just find building out brands fun and interesting to hear about people's passions and trying to help them to be able to grow and to reach more people because everyone is a brand. You're all living, breathing, walking brands in your own nature, whether it's from an author, instructional designer, cook, YouTuber, you name it. Like everyone has their own thing, and trying to help spread the messages about their passions is something that I find really interesting. So
Love it.
I do that. I do that more if I could.
Love it. Wonderful. Well, thank you again. I really appreciate you being here. I know, like I mentioned, our audience definitely is definitely going to take away some great knowledge nuggets from this episode. So thank you for your appearance, being a 2-time guest. Hopefully we can get you. There's only been one other person that's been a 3-time guest. So you're definitely welcome back anytime. And especially, when you got a new book, you got a new project, you got anything that's going on, you always have an open invite, Dr. Luke. So I appreciate you as always. And for all our audience members who are joining us live, or those of you that are going to be catching this on the replay, please make sure you visit our website at myedtech.life, myedtech.life, where you can check out this amazing episode and the other 258 wonderful episodes with content creators, teachers, practitioners, solopreneurs, edupreneurs. We've got a little bit of everything for you, where I promise you that you will take some great knowledge from that you can sprinkle onto what you are already doing great. So please make sure that you visit our website. And if you haven't yet, follow us on all socials at My EdTech Life. At My EdTech Life, we are on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube. We're on X or Twitter. I don't know. I still can't get used to saying X, Instagram, TikTok, and all of those. So please make sure you follow us there. And also, don't forget, like I mentioned, please help us get to 1,000 subscribers on YouTube. So hop on over, give us a thumbs up, and give us a follow or a subscription, I should say. We'd really appreciate that. So thank you, as always, from the bottom of my heart for all of your support. And until next time, my friends, don't forget, stay techie.